Hi, Tom.
Is that you
Yeah, this is
started?
it now. This is the beginning.
Okay, all right, great, fantastic. Hi, Cole.
So, this is Tom. Tom is a DOP friend of mine, best friend, really.
Yeah,
And Tom started using Blender about how long ago now?
just over 2 weeks, I think.
2 weeks. So you're a wee
I'm not
babby.
counting. I'm not counting any broken arm time. So technically, I'm going to deduct that from my
That is true.
Blender.
That is true. Tom is nursing a broken collarbone. Not from Blender use though.
It was actually. I just went really hard. I just went too hard, too fast. I'm burnt. But no, I started using Blender because of you.
Yeah. After I've spent two years trying to get you to pick it up, and
yeah, and I ignored you for 2 years. Yeah. But yeah, it got pretty boring during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like really, really just wanting to try and get creative again. So finally gave it a shot, and I think I owe you a huge apology because I've had a lot of fun.
Well, I'm glad that's publicly on the record as well. So
yeah, great.
I assume you started the same way we all started, right? With a donut, was it?
Yeah, I got about halfway through and then got bored. But I did start with that. That video is definitely quite useful.
It's really good. I think it's my girlfriend had a go at it about a year ago, and she just watching it, bits of it over her shoulder. There was loads of stuff I'd forgotten. I think it's a thing that you should do every year or so, but I didn't finish mine either. I think I got to the cup.
Really? I didn't get to the cup. But the difference is that for those first 2 or 3 days, I had you there just to like ask an ungodly amount of questions, and then that would kind of spur me on to do something or make something else. And do you know what I mean? I was kind of just on a run those first couple of days.
I think that does help if you've got a friend or someone that you can pester. Like I didn't have that at the time, and I think everything took me about 18 times longer. But I think if you've got somebody you can ask,
it's knowing what to ask the internet, and that's why I was struggling with those first couple of days. Like when you don't know what the tools are called, you can't Google how to do this because you just don't know how to word it correctly.
Yeah.
So
something as simple as like edge loops. Do you know what I mean? If you don't know what an edge loop is called, I don't think I knew what an edge loop was actually called.
I still don't.
For a long time.
I didn't know that's what they were called. I thought it was just little yellow lines.
That does make a huge difference. And you're doing a similar sort of, your game plan at the moment, at least, is to do a similar sort of kind of thing in terms of you're mostly working on still images. You're not working on animation and rigging and all of that stuff yet.
Yeah, I've tried to have a little play and stuff, a bit of everything, but definitely right now just focusing on still images and world building, which I kind of did for those first 2 projects which I worked on, which was like a street scene and then a train scene. Yeah. It was like adding lots of very basic objects into a scene, like really not worrying about the modeling so much. And then since then I was like, okay, cool, I want to now like get a bit more detailed and do some more of that, but I need to learn how to model. Yeah. And that's, I think this has been the hardest point so far.
Oh really? You feel
actually trying, like really hitting my head against the screen, learning how to model correctly. But again, I kind of had a moment today where I was modeling something. I realized like I don't need to make this as detailed as I'm making it, because the grand scheme of things, I have to step back and realize like, why am I modeling a piston? Is it because I love pistons? Or is it because like I want that to be in a bigger scene? And at the end of the day, that's what it's there for. So I don't need to.
Yeah. I don't need to spend too much time. And this is why I guess for a lot of people, like who are getting into it, it's why I always point them towards Ian Hubert, because like his stuff is so utilitarian in its style and the way that it's put together. Yeah. Like he doesn't model anything. Well, for the most part, he doesn't model anything that he doesn't have to. But I guess he's so fast that it doesn't matter if he does. And I think he would probably argue the opposite. I think he would say, "Oh, there's loads of stuff in here that you'll never see." And I don't know. I think most of it all reads, but like in terms of his poly count and stuff, like it's incredibly bizarrely manageable.
Yeah, sure.
And I think it's a thing that you see, like when you see it more from, at least in my small experience, like people who have learned 3D traditionally and they've gone and learned it at university, or they've gone through the official routes, they're less likely to cut those corners. And I guess with Blender and the way that we want to work, it's a tool to like work for us in terms of making the very specific thing we want to make. It doesn't necessarily matter how, at this point anyway, how neat and tidy our technique is.
For sure.
You know, it's just you're getting a gauge of like what it is you don't need to do. You know, what it is you don't, you know, what you don't need to model. And I think as well, it makes a difference in terms of how, and I asked you this early on, was how long you want to spend on each project. And your answer is sort of similar to how I feel, which is not too much longer than a day. And that obviously hasn't, you know, so far it's been taking you longer than that. But I think ultimately, you got a very similar attention span to me. I don't think you want to be spending too long on one specific thing. But
I didn't realize how quick you were. Like, now that I've used Blender for a couple of weeks, I didn't realize how insanely rapid you are. I do want to spend the same amount of time. Like, I accept my attention span's pretty bad, but so far the things that I've actually been enjoying, like in Blender, the things where you would probably approach it with a pencil on an iPad.
Sure.
I'm kind of still enjoying learning the process.
Exactly. And this is why I've, you know, there are definitely things that, you know, when I've watched you do stuff and I've gone, oh, you could probably do that a quicker way. And I've not hugely pushed it because I think, well, I mean, screw it, anytime you're in the software making something, as long as you're not getting frustrated. And the thing that surprised me, I guess, about you is I thought you would have got more frustrated and kind of thrown your computer at the wall by now. And you've not, do you know what I mean? Which means you must be enjoying being in the software and playing with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that I'm currently like surprised at, what I'm finding difficult, is the fact that, like, take this morning for instance, I started making a piston, like I said, for a robot that it's going to be like a part, and it doesn't matter if this piston actually makes it into the bigger image. It's just about the fact that I'm trying to like get my head around modeling. And I had the tunes on, I had some coffee, I was loving it, and I was getting into the zone. I was so surprised at how much better I'm getting, especially using the Boole tool.
Boolean.
I said that right? Yeah, Boole, whatever. And I was like in the flow, and then I hit the wall, and then suddenly everything crumbles apart. And that was like, I was shade smoothing my cylinder, because obviously the cylinder needed to be smooth. I shade smooth it. It would then mess up my topology around some kind of screws I had.
Yeah.
And that was it. Like then I just crumble apart, because I'm just like, I don't know how to fix this going forward. I know how to fix it if I rewind the whole morning and 3 hours of my work. I know how to fix it if I do that, but how do I fix it? I'm
a little bit like that. I mean, I'll build stuff and then I'll try and do a thing, and then because I've done something wrong beforehand, it's made the next thing more difficult.
Yeah.
I just at that point give up trying to do it and just change the angle or put it into some shadow or do something with it. I think in terms of neatness, in terms of workflow, and I think that's probably the same for everyone. It's why like Andrew Price says like you should always build it twice, like the second time it'll be a lot faster and a lot neater.
And it's not like I'm not enjoying making it still, so it's good. And I that's what I told myself. Like, I was like getting really frustrated at why this happened. I know why it happened. It happened because I was trying to shade smooth hard edges. Like without me, I know that sounds so obvious, but at the time it wasn't. And I was like, why is this like hole basically messed up? And
it's all of that stuff. And it, it never changes. One day, maybe, the same for me, I'll want to go down the route of like learning how to do properly, incredibly neat topology. But I just, again, with this not really being a full-time job for either of us, like I've had that kind of, and we both have that kind of freedom to be like, well, you know what, like, if it isn't perfect, like speed is almost as important.
That's exactly what I told myself. Like, I walked away from the computer for a little bit, and I came back and I was like, who cares if this is smooth? Like, it's going to be so, if I do use this model, it's going to be so small. And like, I don't want to be, I don't want a folder full of perfect models.
Yeah.
Where if you look at it, you're like, wow, this guy knows how to make a piston. I don't want to be that guy. That piston's going to be used, and it's probably going to be out of focus, and it's probably going to be, barely noticeable. So who cares if it's smooth right now? What I should be doing is just working on the next piece.
And I think that's the other reason it's good to know who you are a little bit as a person. But like for me, I'm in too much of a rush to get the dopamine hit of putting the picture online and people, commenting on it and stuff. So like, I think, which is probably the driving force. Like, I guess it segues nicely into how doing this stuff is different to doing things in the film industry. And like, for me, it was, that initial kind of release of like, putting stuff online that I did in a day that didn't involve, 30 people and crew and all of that stuff, and people sharing it because it wasn't in any way threatening. I think sometimes the film industry can be a little bit insular. I don't think it's quite as kind and sharing as the sort of art community and the 3D community seem to be. So that's a big pull for me. But I guess you're still early on in putting stuff out there, right? So
we've said this before to each other about like what we are creatives. You know what I mean? Like that comes above being a cinematographer is being a creative, and cinematography is a fantastic outflow for that creativity. It fits us really well. And our issue has been during COVID, obviously, this has not been a great output for us. So, having Blender and doing, using other tools to be creative is fantastic. And like you said, you get to make something as a creative, you get to post it online, you get to share it with other people, you get to improve your skills, and you get to make art. And that is inherently what we actually want to do at the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. Here's an interesting question, right? Why do you think we have never done this for cinematography? Like sat down and recorded our thoughts on, what do you think the reasoning is behind, us never doing like a cinematography sort of podcast episode or something?
I would probably argue that we might have done it really early on in our careers because we would think the people we were like surrounded by might have took an interest. But I think, unfortunately, the further you get in your career, how do I word this? It's like the more serious it gets and the more unreachable it seems, and you keep on grabbing for more and more. And like for us in the cinematography world, like there are much more interesting people we would like to listen to doing a podcast than ourselves. And it would be embarrassing, wouldn't it, to make a podcast? I feel like.
I think it's interesting. Like, so, you basically answered perfectly in that I firmly think we're in the sort of Dunning-Kruger phase of doing, 3D stuff. In that, it's essentially the period of time in which you don't know what you don't know yet. So I'm like, I don't feel any reservations about talking about this stuff, even though we could have the exact same conversation about cinematography. And I think that most of those fears that we would both have about it are totally unfounded. Like,
because there are plenty of people who would be under us who would find use from that to learn from what we've learned in our, 6-7 years in the film industry. And it's like, but I think, unfortunately, you only feel interesting if you're at the very bottom or the very top. And we're somewhere in the middle when it comes to, we're not world-class cinematographers, but we've made a fantastic career from it. So it's like, that's the unfortunate part. And like you said, it's all unjustified. Like, it would be totally useful and it would totally be fun. But I also think it's interesting just taking one career and one, being cinematographers, then approaching Blender.
Yeah.
That's, for me, what's been interesting. That for me is it's not so much helped those first couple of scenes that I did, because I couldn't think big like you. Like when you were helping me with my train scene and you were like, why don't you underlight it, the bridge?
Mm-hmm.
My cinematography career, I haven't been able to light a bridge yet. Like, as much as I would like to in the future, I've never lit a bridge. So thinking big was actually really tough for me. But however, it is the same principles as how we would approach any cinematography job. And being able to put lights everywhere was just crazy.
It was interesting because like the first sort of like couple of weeks of you making stuff, that was the thing that I was kind of excited for you to start realizing, I guess, was that you're doing exactly the same job. You're still working with lenses and angles and that kind of thing, and lighting. And I think that like once you start realizing that holy crap, like I can put any size of light anywhere I want, without having to worry about how long it will take, how safe it is, whether there's room for it. It's a sort of like slightly bonkers thing as a cinematographer, having spent 10 years sort of feeling sort of terrified that you're going to put a light in the wrong place and waste 3 hours or
and of people's time as well, lots of people's time. And when it comes to the blender, you are everybody. You're also
you're only wasting your own time.
You're art department as well though, and it's like you're set dressing, you're doing location, you know what I mean, you're doing locations, you're doing all of that by yourself, and you're sat there, and if it doesn't turn out well it's kind of okay, and
it's fine. And that's the other thing as well, is that I found it certainly given me an appreciation for the art department that I didn't have before. Like definitely feeling like as soon as we have an art department, an art director on a film, those conversations need to start happening earlier, because you start feeling like, well, I do have so much of your cinematography is what you're seeing behind your characters or in front of your characters, and it's like to kind of ignore that as a cinematographer it's sort of crazy, really. Like all it takes, if you're shooting somebody against some wallpaper, or the wallpaper is going to take up 75% of the screen. Like that's,
and I would care now if I was in Blender, I would care so much, so deeply, that I would take a lot of time to find that a good wallpaper. In the film industry, I'm relying on this person who I might not have really had a great conversation with beforehand to rock up with some good wallpaper. And yet it's not only do I have a bigger appreciation, but I also realize that I care and I like it, and I actually have I think I have an understanding of what looks good. And if I was on a film set, I could have good conversations with art directors about what I also think, I have my input, what I think would also look good.
For sure. And then, that's not even taking into account, obviously, the other, utility of Blender and film, which is like pre-visualization, like pre-vising your set and building things in Blender. And as you get a little bit quicker in it, like that becomes less of a less of a sort of scary prospect. But just being able to see your scene and set up rough camera angles and even do lighting sort of really unlocks stuff, because then like the thing that we just did, I was able to look around the space with my gaffer and the art director and the director in 3D, and start making decisions that we would normally only be able to make if we were stood in the room, which is crazy, like that's like absolutely insane. And I don't think you have to be super experienced at Blender at all to get to a point where you can be doing that stuff, which is
using it as a tool for outside of Blender, so using it as a tool for your film work and stuff, for sure. It's
sort of crazy, really, especially if you're doing any set built stuff or music videos or anything, where you've got a little bit more room. Like modeling entire houses and stuff can be a little bit complicated, but certainly you can start looking at camera angles and stuff. Like I doubt now that any project that I would do, I wouldn't at least consider whether it was worth doing a previs in Blender, because it wouldn't take, it wouldn't take us very long. I think most stuff we'd have a go, I think.
I guess the surprising thing for me coming into Blender as well was how interested people are in film and cinematography who are also working in Blender. Even if they're not in the same world, I've heard a lot of talk of cameras and composition, and it's kind of like what I'd expect to only hear in the cinematography world or the photography world or something like that, and it's like I'm hearing it in the Blender world, and that surprised me, I think. And it's the same thing. Like I think people who are using Blender are people who inherently would like to be making films or taking photos and stuff like that.
I think so. I think that was, in terms of getting, the small following that I have on YouTube in particular, would be, I think, people wanting to know more about, lighting from the perspective of a cinematographer who's working in Blender. I think it gives you a huge advantage if you can learn a little bit about lighting. Because you just get to hide so much. Like, if nothing else, like, I think a lot of the time, people spend a long time, and I see it a lot, spend a long time on, a really lovely model and then just point, a light from behind camera straight at it, showing all of, everything, there's no shadows, and I think that, like, That would be the last place we'd put a light on the film set.
Could we, or should we go through each other's art right now and like actually talk about that? Because I feel like that would probably be something really useful to do. Like, I know your last one. I don't know which one you'd like to show.
Let's bring up your bridge, because there's quite a few light sources in that, so it's probably a good one.
And then I'd like to see one of yours as well, though, because like obviously, you know, it's kind of like I might be bringing up the right lights and stuff like that, but I might not necessarily be the quality of blendering that you would be. But for me, like with this scene, you know, it was my first big project. It was the first time that I really was like, okay, I'm going to set quite a few days for this. And I'm already past this now. I've kind of moved on, as you do.
Yeah.
But certainly when I got to the point where I could apply the lights to this scene, was the point that I realized, holy shit, like, okay, like this is very much how I would work in the film world. It makes a huge amount of difference, but not only does it make a huge amount of difference to adding drama to my scene or like, you know, narrative perspective or whatever, but it was also changing the way my models look. And those models, like for me, the bridge, I was struggling with the bridge out of everything in this thing. Obviously the most simple
low poly element.
You know what I mean? Low poly element I was struggling the most with. Yet when I added my lights in, it gave me the hard edges, which you can kind of see around the bottom here. It gave me the hard edges, which I really need to give this some depth and to make it, you know, for me, it still doesn't, you know, it doesn't look real. And I didn't want that. I wanted this to look slightly cartoonish. But it just gave me what I needed. And I was trying to do that without lights. I was trying to do that as part of my model. And that's where I was going wrong for sure.
That's exactly it. It's like as soon as you start like pumping some lights in there and, you know, stuff in the foreground and some depth, like obviously you did the clouds. I mean, you've done stuff there that I have never attempted to do inside Blender, because again, I mostly just paint it in Photoshop, but like
sure.
You did the clouds, you know, which are great. Like the fog and the, you know, the steam and stuff, which is, you know, adding so much. But yeah, like, I mean, how many sources are on that?
So we've got, I think, 2 sources from underneath the bridge, and then I've got this layer of fog, which obviously the light is shooting through.
And that's actual fog, right? Volumetric fog. That's not just a 2D image.
That is volumetric fog, I believe.
Yeah, nice.
And there's also 2D. This one over here on the left side, this is an image, which I've then shot another source through just to kind of like backlight it. So there's some backlit fog. There's some backlit fog. There's also some underlit fog here. I then have a giant source, which just blows my mind that I can do this, but I have a giant source which I've then flagged off to kind of just hit the side of my train. You were helping me with that a lot. I've then got a source coming from around where the street light is. It's not actually the street light, but I've got a source that's kind of like imitating the street light. On the front of the train, the clouds themselves had a what would you call it, where you have like a world light? Do you know what I mean? Like an overall general ambient light.
Ambient light essentially.
And then finally, I have a underlight here. For this pole, obviously I've got a load of practical lights, including these kind of like house lights, and these little window squares are a square with a image in front, which I cut the glass out and made it transparent.
Nice.
I think that's it. That's quite a lot. Like that is a lot for me.
No, I mean, it's great. I mean, it's a nighttime scene. There should be lots of sources. I think, that warm glow from below was
that's my favorite. That's where, because I think I learned something from that. Like, again, it's my second project in Blender.
No, I mean, it's amazing. You modeled that train, right? That train isn't an asset.
I think the only thing I haven't modeled is these aerials, because my aerials sucked. And they are definitely Hubert aerials. I modeled everything else, but that underlight on that bridge, that like taught me a valuable lesson going forward for like, okay, I need to apply my lights early. And I need to do them, you know, on a bigger scale, but approach it the same as I would my regular job.
Yeah. Because, I mean, I guess the other problem you've got is that, like, because you're, again, early on, there's going to be loads and loads of geometry there that you don't need. So working with that scene, if I remember right, was quite cumbersome. And it was slow. And I mean, you have a 3090 and, do you know what I mean, about as good a computer as you could possibly have. And, you're pushing it. What will happen in the future when you get used to, you'll start doing your lighting a little bit earlier and stuff like that, and you'll know what's going to be in shadow, is it will get faster and faster to work with because your poly count will be going down and down and down, and it'll be like...
For sure.
Working with the lights will feel essentially just like, working with them in real life. It's kind of amazing.
I'm not sure where I have that in my workflow. Like, where do I have the apply lights? You know what I mean? Like, for me, if I'm making a new scene, and I started making actually something which I didn't even show you, but I'll bring it up. But like, what I was doing is, I guess this is fine. Like, I'm missing a couple of textures here, but like, I was blocking everything out using like simple geometry, I guess, to do my framing.
Yeah.
I would probably start lighting at this point right now. I'm not sure if that's the right place to start lighting, but this is kind of where I'm at for a scene that I was going to work on, and I would probably start lighting it at this point for sure.
Yeah, same. I mean, I think, again, as thinking as a cinematographer, obviously it makes such a huge huge difference to the shape of your room and your angle. So you don't want to be modeling things that aren't going to be in your camera's view because you're going to be wasting your time, and you're not going to know where your camera view is until you know where your model looks best from a lighting point of view.
Yeah.
And so, I don't think this would be the same for everyone, especially for people who aren't experienced in lighting. They'll probably often put this off till the end, but you'll save yourself a lot of time, I think, if you're at this stage where you're in your kind of blocking out point and doing it at this point, because I think it ultimately will save you a lot of time, and you'll be able to just hide things in your shadows.
So what about you then? So where would you, is it a similar sort of scenario for you? Like, when do you start applying your lights?
I mean, often it's a good question. It will depend on the scene, but most of my scenes are in the day, like I said, in daylight.
We spoke about that.
So I just set up a sunlight pretty early on. I'll do a little bit of modeling, but probably no more than like sort of 10, 15 minutes into the process. Just so I can see what it looks like. Because your model totally changes shape once there's some shadows on it. But yeah, so like for the most part, like my lighting's pretty simple. It's more complicated for nighttime stuff. And I have done nighttime stuff, but again, like normally no more than sort of two or three sources. And I try to do it as early as possible, because to be honest, it just keeps me interested in the model. Like I get bored. Do you know what I mean? I don't work in a linear way either. And I'm getting better at this, but especially when I was starting out, I was not working in a linear fashion. Like it would be like, I'll do a bit of modeling, a bit of lighting, but you know what I mean? It was like crazy.
You say that they're like with the lights, and you're like, I might only be using 4 or 5 sources, like you said, right? But like, I've seen your work, and those sources are very important. Like, it might only be a few in a daylight scene, but like, I like looking at your screen right now, that light that's kind of hitting between the 2 prongs of that spaceship. Huge.
Yeah, so I mean, like with this
depth that is adding, like you've got some lights there that are adding so much that other people will just not be able to see.
Yeah, I think I mean, this is a good scene, and I've actually done a breakdown of this one before, but this is a good one because I'm actually using more lights than I maybe ordinarily would, but like having something here that we can use to point back at the front of the model doesn't make any sense like from an art, but I mean, you could maybe argue there's a building there bouncing a bit of light back. But
it's like your world, it's your world, Carl. You can have those lights wherever you want.
Exactly. But like ordinarily, that's what this scene would look like under kind of the lighting conditions that I would normally go for. There wouldn't be this front light, but I mean, we
add that back in. I want to see my girl now.
So you can get away with stuff like that you know, in a way that you wouldn't think was necessarily logical. But look, it's not like I just put that light there first time. I was like, oh yeah, that's it. Like I was probably dragging that light around for like 20 minutes, deciding whether I liked it or not.
Yeah.
You know, and playing with the color and stuff as well.
For sure.
And this was an old technique that I don't do this now because I do it in Photoshop, but like having this background here with a light pointed into it gave you so much, you know, if you didn't want to add your sky in later, because you could then control the base color of the sky, and then that would change, you know, how that, you know, light would feel without even changing the light itself. You know, if you make that brighter, you know, it totally changes how the whole thing feels. So it's a good way of working if you want to see it, and like how you're working at the moment, if you just want to see everything in Blender, and then you're only going to do a minimal amount of work later, or if you're doing, you know, animation, you know, playing with stuff like that, I think is. You know,
I'm a little bit scared of my first daylight scene. I don't know if you've noticed or not. I have not approached daylight yet. And that is for those reasons. It's like, if I'm approaching a daylight scene in real life, you know, I'm often, again, it won't be on a big scale. So it might be characters, but I'll be often thinking about my diffusion more than my lights. I don't know. It's that, you know, like narratively speaking, you've got like a sunset kind of scene there, and yet your light is kind of above, and you say it could be from anything. Who cares? But that's you've really got to kind of just like break free and just put that light where it's going to look best.
Yeah, I think you know, it's trial and error. It's looking at references and again having an eye for cinematography, which, you know, thankfully, you know, I feel like 10 years of doing it has helped me with. I, again, always opt to keep things simple, both in Blender and, you know, on a real life set. Like, I think, you know, where possible, like as few sources as possible. But yeah, I mean, like you say, it's just a case of experimenting and playing. And when it comes to doing a daylight scene, you know, there are pros and cons to it. Like in some ways you have more shadows depending on your model. You know, you can really use harsh sunlight to you know, cast really deep dark shadows, which is, you know, can be useful. But at the same time, yeah, you've got brighter sources, you see more stuff. It all depends on the kind of, you know, the style of thing that, you know, you want to make. Like I do a lot of long lens, very big objects far away, and just focus on the objects. I don't add a lot of peripheral stuff in a lot of what I do. Whereas like doing these street scenes, you know, they terrify me because it's like you need so many scatter assets that, you know, that my art really is the sort of product of efficiency and, you know, attention deficit. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. No, like
know.
I said, again, going back to the start, like I just didn't realize how quick you were at that.
Yeah, you just
I understand it from a software point of view now, but still, like,
you know, you just get used to shapes. You make a shape once, you like that shape, you can go back to it. You can, you know, you start like just recycling stuff that you've done before. I have a few more plugins that, you know, I know the plugins now that like, you know, that I'm the kind of person who has 3 or 4 plugins that I use constantly, as opposed to like, you know, my brain can't process. It takes me so long to learn a new system, like kind of longer than anyone else that I know, really. It's why, like the techniques that I use are there's a fairly short list, but they're really sort of exhausted. Do you know what I mean? I've done them a lot.
Sure, for sure. There is somewhere like you know, you've shown me an add-on, you've kind of taught me how to use it, and I've kind of only really skimmed the surface. But there are a few that, like I said, with the Boolean tool, I'm like hitting that hard at the moment. I'm really that's changing the way that I'm modeling massively.
And obviously there's lots of plugins out there that will automate all of this Boolean stuff, you know, things like box cutter, you know, that make that process really fast, which I absolutely would recommend. Like Grid Modeler is my sort of speed modeling.
I'm still using that on a very basic scale maybe, but certainly still using that.
The other thing as well that like shocked me a little bit about when I started Blender was how quickly it was that I was doing something that very few or nobody, like mixing things together in a way that nobody else was, and nothing particularly extravagant. I'm not saying I was paving the way in any regard, but like it was having come from 10 years of cinematography where you're essentially what you're doing is recreating somebody else's work time and time again. It's very difficult to be wholly original from a cinematography point of view in the film industry, more so as a writer or a director or an actor, I think. But like as a cinematographer, to like really pave the way and do something new, I think especially without a lot of money, I think it's next to impossible. And it was kind of like surprising that people were like subscribing to my stuff early on and asking me questions about Blender, and I was going, well, like, I'm not far out of the donut tutorial. I didn't even finish the donut tutorial. Like, I can't fathom that I'm doing a combination of things here that haven't been done in that order before. And yeah, that was sort of amazing. And then, people would sort of subscribe and, and like, it's madness how quickly you'll go from sort of like feeling like you're learning to like having come up with a combination of things that's unique that people will really be interested in.
Honestly, like hearing that, I think that boils down to people not applying the tool to actually create and do world building. Like they need to make a scene. And I've got friends who have been in the film in this in the 3D world now, because growing up in the film industry, it means we know plenty of people who have been in VFX and stuff like that. And I know guys who have worked for the biggest agencies in the world, and in their spare time, they do not do world building. They do not create, either still or animating things that are like world building. They'll create a model and they'll try and make a perfect model, and it will look incredible if they do like a model, and that's it.
Yeah.
There's no use making, again, like coming back to this piston that I was modeling this morning, there is no use to me making this and modeling it well, because it needs to, and its only purpose for me, its sole use, is to be put into a world which is going to make people go, that's cool. Yeah. Oh, look, there's robots and they're drinking from a vending machine in rural Japan. Like, that looks cool. Yeah. And that's world building, and that's what you've done straight off the bat. It's just world building.
Yeah, that was because do you know what I mean? I've got no desire, or I had no desire really, to turn this into a job. It was purely escapism, and it was like it didn't matter how ridiculous my poly count, as long as my computer wasn't crashing. And I have to say, shout out to Blender for this, because it's the most stable software I've ever used. Like, as long as my computer wasn't crashing, and I really pushed it. Like some of my early models are actually disgusting.
Sure.
But it didn't matter, because I was doing a still image. It didn't need to be workflowed into anything else. It was purely for me, and
you get to go mad. You just get to go crazy. And
exactly.
Just build it.
And if you're doing as well, if you're doing still images, it doesn't matter whether it takes an hour and a half to render, render your frame or whatever. Again, you'll just get neater, and those, everything will become more efficient as time goes on, and like that stuff you'll naturally just get better at it. But I think the problem can sometimes be is that if, like, from day one you start learning Blender and you're being taught the absolute correct etiquette, regardless of whether it's sort of counterintuitive or not, it's just going to put you off a little bit. And I think I'm kind of glad that like I didn't just have that mountain of information sort of just drops on me, because I just wouldn't. I barely use computers much before I did this. You built my computer for me. I don't even know what's in my computer, and it's like I'm the last person on earth really who you would expect to have got into this stuff. It's
easy to get into that hole though, like where like I had that experience this morning. Like I was getting angry at something not being perfect, and it's like you really have to just step back and be like, does it matter? Does it matter?
Get it done. Get it on Instagram. Get some likes. Do another picture.
Yeah. And be creative. And
this won't work for everyone. And like some people just absolutely love being very good at 3D, which is absolutely fair enough. And there's people on like my Discord and stuff that are just far better than that stuff than me, and still subscribe to my Patreon, which is quite amazing. It's a big shout out to all of those guys. But, I think
that's because they're not trying to learn from you how to use Blender. They're trying to use how to use Blender as a tool
to be creative. Yeah,
exactly.
Sure.
And that's what I'm here for. Do you know what I mean? That's what you're here for. It's like, I'm not on Blender right now to learn this tool the best I can. I'm on here to try and actually click file export and have something that I'm like, cool, I'm going to share this now on social media. I'm going to share this on my portfolio, and I'm just going to add that to the stack of artwork that people might look at when I'm dead.
Yeah, it's a morbid way of looking at it,
right? That's what you're trying to do. You're just trying to have something for your funeral to like, for us all to like walk past.
And I guess that sort of brings on sort of the last thing really that I the important thing about Blender when I'm telling people to use it is that from a mental health point of view, for people, I think specifically in the film industry, who feel a little bit like, they're only doing 1 or 2 good projects a year that they really love. Like my first recommendation, I've had a couple of people get in touch recently who've been like, oh, I'm trying to get out of corporate, so I'm trying to do things more creative or whatever. And I'm like, with the industry as it is, I mean, it's opening up now, but like, over the last 6 months, my first go-to has always been just pick up Blender. Like, if nothing else, like, it's just make the donut. Do you know what I mean? It's something, it's
again
something
and
for fun.
Again and again.
Like Gemma, my fiance did it, and like my mum was using Blender for like quite a while, like before she got busy with work again. I mean, she was making all sorts of random stuff, and I think that like there's no, you don't have to be really passionate about 3D. You can just do it for the fun of it, and then just slowly get better at it. And you're doing things in Blender, in your first 2 weeks that I had to ask you how to do. Like it wasn't long before like I was asking you questions. Oh, how did you do that? What's that shortcut? And I think that
that's just from like watching like I'm finally at that phase now where I'm like, oh, I want to make a weld line on this piece of metal, and I get to open up YouTube, and I am absolutely shocked how there is a tutorial for everything on YouTube. Like, it's things that I just wouldn't imagine, and I now I can follow the tutorial without getting lost, and that's really nice. And there's going to be certain things that I've Googled and that you might not yet Googled. Do you know what I mean? And vice versa.
It's a huge milestone. The milestone where clicking on, and I think I remember my mum mentioning this as well. She found the same thing. The milestone where you clicking on a tutorial isn't like, a terrifying prospect, because you can basically almost skim through big portions of it.
I'm just there. I'm just there. It's beautiful. It's honestly, and like I had one today where there was a step in the tutorial that he basically didn't say, but I was able to like look at his screen and just dissect what he just done. Yeah. And that is just like,
The crazy one, I mean, like the weirdest thing for me is like I now occasionally have to go back to my own tutorials that I've made to remember how to do a thing, like which is insane. And my brother messaged me. He does a bit of 3D stuff, and he messaged me to be like, oh, I was trying to learn a thing, and he was like, I was looking at tutorials. The only one that made sense was a tutorial that I'd already put online, and that was because I don't know anything about Blender. So it was perfectly aimed that people, there was lots of like, look, I don't know why this works. But just click this and it will work, because it's an efficient way of teaching people, again, who aren't necessarily super interested in being the greatest 3D artist in the world, who just want to make stuff. I think
I do the verbal technique. Like today when I was making the world lines, I was going right modifier, subsurface modifier, right click, turn to mesh, and then like it was like just verbally doing it 6 times, and now I shouldn't forget, but I will. And I noticed that after like breaking my collarbone and not being able to do Blender for a week, and I just kind of like, I'd burnt out after my last project. So I was like, I'm going to take a few days off. Yeah. Then I hurt myself. So then I couldn't do Blender for a week. Mm-hmm. That first day back was awful. I'd forgotten everything. It's took me like 2 days to get back in the flow, but now I'm back in the flow. It's like,
that will improve. I think like I could take a few weeks off now and not feel too much of the damage of it. But
everything.
Yeah, but I think when you're starting out, it can be really difficult. I think if you have a really good week on it, you burn yourself out, then you take a week off, and then you try and go back to it. I think that's the danger zone. Like because you feel like, oh, I've learned all of this shit. I shouldn't have to go back, and you often will. So
that's what I meant. Like, you just got to open up the program and make something, and don't worry if it's crap. Like I think this week alone, I've tried to make a robot arm, I've tried to make a smoke grenade, and they're all awful, and I'm probably never going to open up them again. But next time I approach the robot arm, it'll be better. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes you've just got to have a few days of that.
Yeah, I think as well, if you like, because you could, this is the thing, there's different kinds of people. I think you're similar to me in that, like, you could go onto TurboSquid, find a robot and just download it and then put it in the background of your scene. I think if you're sat at home, you're not in a rush and you're not working for clients. It's like I'm always of the, you know, it's even the same with Ian Hubert stuff. Like I adore his stuff. It's like some of his stuff would be perfect for my scenes. I'll still every single time go and try and make my own. And I think that's why he feels so safe with his Patreon, just putting all his assets out there, because most people want to have a go at doing it for themselves. You know, and I think
I was just thinking that this morning, because I think about you putting your Patreon stuff up, and I was just like, would you fear that you would fear that like other people are going to do world building and create scenes and stuff, and it would be like everything's going to look like your stuff, and then your stuff will no longer look like your stuff because it looks like the stuff that. But I haven't seen that. I don't think that is.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's stuff looks like their stuff. Do you know what I mean? I think that
because they actually want to do it.
There are a couple of people whose art, like I've looked at and I've gone, whoa, that's close. And it always entertains me because it feels as if it's like, oh, it's like me with, you know, more time. Do you know what I mean? I look at it and go, oh, I would have absolutely created something like that. And I'm glad that they did it, because now I can look at it. But I've never felt threatened. So yeah, and again, that's another good thing about just it being open source, having a really lovely community, people just being really interested, asking lots of questions. Very few egos that I've come across. Certainly not the case in the film industry. Yeah, you know, so that
mostly just yours right at the top. It's been good, and it's been great being able to ask questions and stuff like that. And I'm looking forward to like the next week or two. I'm hoping for myself, like the next week or two, I'm just gonna piss around modeling stuff and making absolute garbage and then deleting it, and then hopefully that accumulates in the next 2 weeks is my kind of like third project that I'm gonna attempt. But
well, I think that's what we'll do. I mean, we'll hopefully, if people didn't hate this one, we'll just revisit. Do you know what I mean? And follow. I think it'd be nice to just follow your kind of journey through. And again, one of the reasons for doing this is there isn't a whole lot of content of people just talking to each other about Blender. There's lots of solo people talking about, you know, their tutorials and stuff, but there isn't a huge amount of content. I know Andrew Price does a few where he interviews people, but I think it would be nice. Yeah, I think it's nice hearing people chatting about it and
it's not at all useful to learning how to use Blender, because I have no clue what I'm doing, and you clearly use the tools that work for you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I say this on my Patreon and on my YouTube, like if you're here for best practice when it comes to 3D, like go elsewhere. But there are lots and lots of places that you can absolutely go. Like, you know, I think for a lot of people, you know, this is just an extra, you know, side thing. People are interested in the sort of creativity workflow side of things. And that's, you know, really what, you know, it's the cinematographer's sort of like window into this, you know, into
let's make Blender work for us. Let's make Blender work for our you know, our creativity, whether it's animation or whether it's still image, because you know that at the end of the day, that's what you're trying to do, and let's make it work for us and create some art.
100%. Well, yeah, we'll, you know, when hopefully you're able to make stuff with your broken arm.
I can do like 30 minutes. I can do like 30 minutes at the moment, and then I get hurry. So
yeah, well, hopefully,
we'll go nap time.
We will revisit this, but yeah, if anyone has listened to the end, fair play.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, any other things you want to mention?
No, that's everything. I think we did good.
Great. All right, nice one.
Cool.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.